Good morning, Year 4. I hope you're all well. Welcome to your history session for this week. Now, today we are going to be focusing on a special place called Sutton Hoo, and we're going to be learning about why this place is considered one of Britain's most significant archaeological sites. That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? So we're going to find out about that today. Now, to be successful in this lesson, you will be able to explain what an archaeologist does and why they excavate certain sites. You'll be able to study different objects and answer different questions about them, really making sure that you can be a detective. And you'll be able to make suggestions about what the objects discovered at Sutton Hoo tell us about the type of person who may have been buried there. Very exciting lesson, and I'm really excited for you to find out all about Sutton Hoo today. So you have some retrieval here. Now, thinking back to our lesson 2 weeks ago, all about Anglo-Saxon villages. Now, I would like you to use this picture of a typical Anglo-Saxon village. Write down 5 things that you remember about Anglo-Saxon village life. So write the title Retrieval, or the subheading Retrieval, and underneath it, number 1 to 5 things that you can remember. It might be about the water, the sheep. I'm not going to give you any more clues. Okay, pause the video and have a go. Okay, how did you get on? Did you remember lots of things? Let's have a look at what actually was in an Anglo-Saxon village then. So we know that their villages were positioned near water because that would help them to eat, but also, drink, not eat, drink the water, but also fish in there to be able to eat them. Also, we had a larger house in the middle of the village, and this was where the chief of the village lived. Now, if they had feasts or meetings, they might also meet here too. They also had lots of fields. They wanted to grow crops and also plant. They had smaller village houses, which we zoomed into a bit more last lesson for our retrieval, where lots of big families lived in these really small houses. They didn't have much there. There's some pots that were made out of clay. Livestock, so different animals, were kept in the village. Now, children would be responsible for looking after these animals and looking out for wolves, because they were really wild in Britain during these times, weren't they? We know. And some buildings were reserved to do specific things, such as performing a craft, like weaving or using as storage units. Now, I'm going to teach you a new word today. You might have heard of this word before, but if you haven't, you are going to be very excited because this is going to unlock lots of new knowledge for today's lesson. So, the word is excavate. Can you say that? Fantastic. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's a verb. It's a doing word. So, this word has 3 syllables. Excavate. And the definition of excavate is to make a hole by digging. And this is something that archaeologists did to try and find out information. They used to excavate land and make a hole by digging the land to try and find out more information, which is what they did at Sutton Hoo. You can see here there are some people, we're not sure if they're actually archaeologists, but they are people who want to discover new things, and they are excavating, they are digging a hole. So we know some synonyms for this word are dig or cut out, but an antonym would be to fill. If we're not excavating, digging, we are filling the land. We could also use this word by saying the site was excavated in 1975. It was dug out in 1975. So we're going to be learning about that today. Now, I've got some pictures here for you, and I want you to use the clues in the picture. Can you guess what job is being described? Someone who spends a lot of time in mud. They dig with certain things, they find things underground, and they study the past. Do you know what job is being described? Did you guess? I think I already gave you a clue in our vocabulary practice there, but the pictures were describing the job of an archaeologist. Now, do you know what an archaeologist does? Well done, some super information there, Year 4. So archaeologists like to find out about the past. They want to discover objects that have been buried in the ground. They think that if they dig the objects up and investigate them, they can find a lot out about history if they study the objects that have been previously left behind. Lots of objects that have been found that have been underground for thousands of years are really, really interesting to archaeologists because it tells them a lot about the history of things. So it could tell, something could tell us about the Romans, something could tell us about the Anglo-Saxons. Now, sometimes when the archaeologists are excavating the ground, they will find lots of different pieces of a single object. So in this Sutton Who investigation, the archaeologists who actually dug up, excavated the ground, found a helmet that was in about 500 pieces, and they had to put them back together to find out what it meant. And that would have taken a lot of time. So archaeologists are very, very devoted, we could say the word from our RE lesson, to their profession. And sometimes they'll dig down and discover the remains of a whole town, because things that have been buried underground for millions of years have just been found, and it would have made remains from a whole town. Now, archaeologists find sites to dig up in many different ways. Now, sometimes there are lumps in the ground that don't look natural, and archaeologists are really intrigued and interesting to investigate and see what these lumps in the ground are. Sometimes you can see marks on the ground from the air that you can't see on the ground. So archaeologists go up to the sky in small planes and take photographs, because when they're up in the air, they can see the marks in the ground that they can't see when they're on the ground. So they go in lots of different ways and find these things. What they also do is they walk over newly ploughed fields to see if any objects have been brought to the surface. So they're really, really interested in excavating land and going beneath the surface to really find out anything interesting. Now, Sutton Who is a really, really important archaeological site. Now, this is a place just outside of Ipswich in Suffolk. Now, Sutton Who is an Anglo-Saxon place because it has the word turn, well, the suffix turn at the end of it. And we know that was one of our Anglo-Saxon words from last lesson. Now, Sutton Who is a collection of mounds. So that means hills, some are little, some are big. And it's not far from the sea. Now, that's really important that we know that Sutton Who is not far from the sea. Now, archaeologists were really interested. We know that they like to look at the lots of the lumps and the bumps in the ground. And they were really interested in the lumps and the bumps at Sutton Who. Now, this is where it gets quite interesting because a big house was built near these mounds in the year 1910. And a lady called Edith Pretty bought that same house in 1926, so 16 years later. And when Edith bought the house, she was also interested, like the archaeologists were, about the mounds. She thought there was something more to it. You can see this really big mound here. It's a lot bigger than some of the other mounds that were in Sutton Who. So, 12 years later, in 1938, she asked one of the local archaeologists, and his name was Basil Brown. And she said, "Basil, would you do some digging on these moles to find out if there's anything interesting buried underneath?" Do you think she's going to find anything under the mounds? We'll have to wait and see. Now, you are right, Basil Brown, he was digging and he found something very important. Now, he needed confirmation from another archaeologist that he'd actually found something here. So he asked Charles Phillips. Now, Charles Phillips went to this university called Cambridge University, the University of Cambridge. It's a very, very important university where really, really clever people go. So we know that Charles Phillips would be offering some great advice if Basil Brown asked him. So he said, "Charles, let's go and have a look what's in this mound." And here they are in the mound. They have found something. Now, looking at this picture, what do you think they have found? Pause the video and have a think. Did you get it right? Did you notice that it was an imprint of a whole ship? Now, they worked out that this was a burial ship. Do you know what that means? A burial ship. It's a ship that had been buried. Now, bearing in mind, Sutton Who was near the sea, this ship would have been dragged from the sea and placed in this mound to then let the earth cover it over for hundreds of years. However, when they found the ship, it was really strange because None of the wood from the ship that makes the ship had survived, and there wasn't a body either. Only the iron rivets remained. So that is like the iron, the parts of iron from the ship, as well as the metal, the stone, and the glass objects that the person was buried with. So there was no sign of a body, so we don't know whose ship it was. But what they do know is that there was lots and lots of different objects that were found in this ship too. Why do you think the wood from the boat and the body were not in the ship? Pause the video and have a think. Well, did you know that different types of earth make different objects rot? So it really depends what the earth is like. If it's normal soil, the bones of a skeleton would survive, so they'd be able to tell whose body it was. However, they were unable to tell whose body it was at Sutton Who because the sand at Sutton Who is very acidic, which meant that the skeleton had just rotted away. If the burial ship had been left in soil, we might have had bones and wood to be able to tell whose body it was. But today, we need to be detectives and we need to use the evidence that we have, the objects that we know that were left in the ship underneath the mound, to really find out who was this person who was buried, whose ship this was. Now this picture here shows the remains of what a body would look like if it was buried in soil. So you can see the skeleton here and they've got a little stick to measure how long it was. Now, today our job is to think, what type of person was buried at Sutton Who? Because the burial ship has been a historical mystery since discovery. Historians are still not sure exactly who the ship belonged to and who might have been inside. So, what do you think we could do to solve the mystery? How could we be a detective? Pause the video and have a think. Okay, well, at Sutton Who, there were lots and lots of objects that were found in and around the ship. And these objects from the past can tell us a lot about people from a long time ago. So in your resource pack, you have some object cards. What I would like you to do is put them into two piles. That was 4, I meant 2. So you need to put them into 2 piles. One pile, I know what these objects are. Another pile, I don't know what these objects are. Now, if you cannot print them, that's fine, because you can still go to your resources now and you can start to consider which ones you know and which ones you don't know. And you can just make a list of, I know, for example, a sword, or I don't know, a lyre. Okay, and that's a type of instrument. Okay, so that's your next task. So go onto your resources, identify which objects that you do know and which that you don't know. Start to think, do these tell us about the type of person that were buried at Sutton Who? And that's what we're going to look at next. Okay, off you go.